Hi, this is Marshall again, and Charlie the Mike here. So we're just here together here in Lehi, Utah, at Chuck Lovelady's church, Timpanogos Church of the Bible. And we're just getting together to have a little ex-Mormon or Mormon researchers family reunion. We don't get together very often, and it's just kind of do some sharing. So we'll ask a few questions and just have fun. So that's what this is all about. And so I'll just let each person introduce themselves, hold the mic there, and we'll do some question and answers.
Thank you, Marshall. I'm Charles Larson, and I'm infamous, I guess, for being the author of By His Own Hand Upon Papyrus, a number of other things. I ran a chapter of Saints Alive down in Provo, way back in 1980. It seems like we've been doing this forever. But anyway, that's me. I pass my mic to my betters.
I'm Marv Cowin, and I'm in Utah primarily because my great-grandparents were Mormons, and my grandparents, my parents, and I was raised Mormon. And I came here 60 years ago to plant churches and do what I could to reach Mormons. I became convinced when I trusted Christ that Mormons were lost, and I wanted to do something to see them come to know Christ, and that's been part of our ministry.
I'm Terry, and I really don't have any stories other than I was praying behind everybody that was witnessing last time I was here.
That's good. That's important, having that prayer support. So I think you were here like 12 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, Terry. So he's kind of like me. I mean, I got into this. I didn't have a Mormon background, but I have a relative. Oh, Christy Darlington, Witnesses for Jesus. So anyway, I have a Mormon background, but I have a relative who got into Mormonism. And right after I graduated from high school, I was like, feeling like God was calling me to this ministry because he was serving a mission for the church, and we went back and forth on letters, and I wasn't getting anywhere, and I discovered there's a mindset behind what people get into this kind of religion where they reinterpret the Bible according to what their leaders tell them. And so I started to learn that. Really glad we could get together today.
I feel like I'm talking into a little fuzzball here. Yeah, I know. I heard Charlie the Mike. Yeah. I'm Jamie Thompson, and I've been in Utah for 30 years, and I'm with Tri Grace Ministries, and this is my husband, so I'm with him.
Yeah, my name is Chip Thompson. I was involved with the Manti pageant, and I would say our church was the church that was responsible for uniting what was going on the streets. We invited all the Christians to come to our church in Ephraim, Utah, which is just 7 miles south of Manti. And we all became really close friends. We all worked together. We learned from each other. And we all became better witnesses because of the Manti pageant. And then in the process of all that, I compiled a book with a lot of the different witnessing techniques that were used on the streets called Witness to Mormons in Love. And my real name's Daniel Thompson, so I use that as my author title. So A Witness to Mormons in Love by Daniel Thompson, and that's the book that I wrote. So.
Well, thank you, guys. I think we want to start with Chuck Larson here, Charles Larson, to just maybe give us well, first, I'd really like to hear about your books. Let's do something about your book, why you wrote the book and that kind of thing, because I want to ask some more questions about that, and then we'll just go around after that. So could you tell us something about why would you write a book like that? How'd you get involved? Give us something about that.
Okay, well, you want to do this as an interview type thing, and then you ask questions and so forth? That'd be
Whatever
fine.
you like.
Okay, well, gosh. I remember first looking at the questions in Mormonism as a convert. I joined the Mormon church when I was 19 years old, and just a young man in the Army. And I'd always, well, since I was 11, been a Christian. And to me, Mormonism was presented as Christianity plus. In other words, everything that I had experienced in my relationship with God and with Christ had been in preparation for receiving the fullness of the gospel. Sound familiar? Any of you? So I was away from home and hungry for some spiritual contact, and the only decent guy in the whole barracks was a fellow in the bunk next to me who was a Mormon convert of about a year, and he was all enthusiastic with missionary fire. So he got me reading the Book of Mormon, and boy, I got halfway through the Book of Lehi, and gee, this sure sounds Old Testament-like to me. So that pretty much made me open the door to want to believe everything I was told. That was in about October of 1969, and then by February of 1970, I allowed myself to be baptized and receive the Holy Spirit and all this other stuff, and boy, I was just on fire too. When I came home from my training, and I just wanted to contact everybody that I knew and tell them all about this, and most of them went, oh boy, another Mormon. But a few of them listened, and I actually managed to go and bring several of my friends into the Mormon church. For several years, I lived this committed lifestyle, came to Utah to go to BYU, met my wife, married her in the temple in Manti. That was an experience. I saw a picture of the inside of the Manti temple, and it looked pretty, so I thought, that's where I want to get married, and the whole thing was just so impersonal. But that's another story. Anyway, after several years, 2 children, I felt a hunger in my heart, in my soul. I missed the relationship I'd had directly with Jesus Christ. So working as a night watchman at the time, I'd listen to Christian radio so I could get some real sermons and some real insight and teachings. Still tried to go ahead and hold on to all this Mormon idea and what have you, but the more I did this, the more questions I had. I'd envisioned, and I've told this story many times, I'd envisioned the church when I joined it as this huge pillar of truth rising above a sea of confusion. And then I would go and discover some little part of that truth that didn't quite fit, like the Adam God theory. That doesn't belong. A couple other things here and there. And they would be a brick in that pillar of truth that was way the heck out and somewhere else, hovering in space. Archaeology in the Book of Mormon, I hundreds of bricks. Many things like that. Joseph Smith's philandering that led to polygamy, I couldn't reconcile that. So I'd try to reconcile, and I'd read the works of apologists, people like Hugh Nibley and a number of other forgettable people whose names I can't even bring up right now. And they would go and tell me how to build a bridge of rationalization from those disjointed bricks back to the pillar of truth so that it would connect. And this satisfied me for a little while until one day I just stood back and looked at that picture I had, and instead of a perfect pillar of truth, I had this Rube Goldberg sculpture of all of these rationalization bridges trying to connect to each other to get back in there. And I thought, that's not what I thought I was joining. So I did something at that point that most Mormons never do. I gave myself the right to ask questions. And until a Mormon does that, they will accept whatever rationalization they have to have. That's been my experience with them. So given myself the right to ask questions, I then began to receive answers. I went to a Baptist church down in Provo, contacted the pastor and said, I'm a Mormon convert. I've been in the Mormon church for several years, and I'm having questions and doubts. And I had always been taught that the Mormon church was could not be proven wrong. I said, is there anything that questions the validity of the Mormon church? I think I chuckled a little bit. And invited me to come over and talk to him, and he gave me a book to read. It was a phone book about that thick, the plastic binding on it, called Mormonism, Shadow or Reality. I was working as a prison guard at the time on the midnight shift, and so I took that book to work with me, and I read that entire book, all several hundred pages, tiny little print, double column, in 6 days.
6 days. Holy cow.
And then I rested on the 7th. So I lived with this for a while, began drinking coffee in the morning that my wife didn't know about. She was 5th generation on both sides of the family. And finally one day I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I said, honey, let's go for a ride today. It's a beautiful, beautiful summer day. So she says, okay. And we got into the car and we drove all the way down to Manti, where we'd been married. And we sat on the green grass of the hill of the Manti Temple. And tactful person that I was, I chose that setting and time to go and tell her that I didn't believe the Book of Mormon or Mormonism or Joseph Smith was a prophet at all. I could have cut her heart out and done less damage, okay? And she cried all the way home. I told her I still believed in Jesus Christ, and I had the same testimony, and I tried to share that, but she would hear none of it. To her celestial marriage and her everything came crashing down. So she got home and called the bishop. And the bishop came over and talked to us, and he says, I'm going to send the 70s. At that time, the 70s were acting as ward missionaries. So the pair of 70s showed up. I love this part of the story. There were 2 of them. One of them was an old fellow who'd been born and bred in Utah and deep into the church, but just a kind of a pleasant, fuddy old. He's the kind of person you'd think of as being named Heber Fudd. Okay, and he became my wife's comforter. Well, I would go for walks around the block with the younger guy, a Catholic convert of about 3 years who was still on that missionary zeal, loved to go and research doctrines and so forth. And we'd go and walk around the block and talk. And I remember distinctly the one conversation that we had that changed my wife's life. I told him about not being able to go and justify the church claiming to be the one true church of God when I knew all of these things weren't so. And he told me, well, you're very perceptive to recognize that there's something wrong with the church today. Because certain keys have been taken from the mother church, and they have yet to be restored to make the church complete. Oh, really? I thought. He said, yes, I want to give you a book to read, and I want it back because it's a rare book. So I said, okay. And he handed me a Leaf and Review by B. Harvey Allred, which, as some of you may or may not know, is the fundamentalist guide to why polygamy is right. This guy was a closet polygamist. He wasn't practicing, but he was a believing fundamentalist, and he would attend meetings up in Salt Lake, and he had his eye on a couple of the neighborhood high school girls. And so I went home and promptly told my wife about that and showed her the book. And it is a rare book. The reprints alone are hard enough to find. But I read that whole thing, and And when I got done with it, I gave it back to him, and I said, well, that was an interesting book, but my question runs a little deeper. I'm not concerned with how the church went wrong. I'm concerned about whether it was ever right to begin with. And he said, well, that's just the wrong question. Well, okay, that ended those walks around the block. But after I told my wife about this, she then decided that if the bishop had no more inspiration on her behalf than to send a polygamist into our home to try to convert me to polygamy, then maybe he didn't have the inspiration he was supposed to have, and that gave her the right to ask questions. because in her family, polygamy had always been the bane. She'd had ancestors that were banished to Idaho and practically starved to death because their husband couldn't support them during the manifesto. So that gave her her right to question. So I told her about Shadow or Reality, and she spent 6 months going through that book, crying at every chapter and so forth, until she got about halfway through. And at the same time, I said, okay, I want you to go and read some scripture. Put the Book of Mormon down. Put the Doctrine and Covenants and Pearl of Great Price and all of that other stuff down, and go just to the Bible. Don't start with Genesis or get into all the begats or, the kings and what have you. You'll do that later on. Start with the book of John. So she did. And she realized that her relationship had always been with Christ, and that the church was just a vehicle for her that was running on flat tires, and its transmission was shot and it was all rusted out. Okay, Jesus Christ was there, and Jesus Christ was real. So this 5th generation Mormon on both sides came out. We've been married 48 years.
Awesome.
Well, anyway, so, okay, on to, how did we start this? Why did I write the Book of Abraham
Why
book?
did you end up doing the Book of Abraham? How
Well,
did you even get involved in the Book of
okay.
Abraham? I mean, you read through more the Shadow, so now you know something about it.
now I know something about it, and this struck me as the strongest argument to be able to show to a Mormon to go and prove that Joseph Smith was a fraud. I mean, there were many other things. I could get into the archaeology, but most of that's esoteric to them. And they say, well, you believe what you want to believe, but we believe that there's something there that's hidden and nobody can find it and all that. So I said, well, here's the proof right out there. And I looked for things that had been written on it. There was a guy named D.J. Nelson going around at the time making some waves. Some of you will remember that. I discussed him in my book. And he was discredited by a number of people for who he was, not necessarily what he was saying about the Book of Abraham. I said to myself, something needs to go and clarify all of this. There needs to be a pillar of shining truth rising out of the sea of confusion. So I prayed about that, and I've written a number of books, and when I do that, everything comes to me at once, how it's going to be. And I get surprises along the way, but everything about By His Own Hand upon Papyrus made sense. I said, first you have to lay out the Mormon case, why they believe that. Then you have to lay out what they found. Then you have to go and show what it's wrong with it. And then you have to go and do the Mormon responses to it. And then just for kickers and dessert, you throw in a Christian witness. So that was the format that I used.
Sounds like the book, doesn't it?
Yeah, that sounds like the book. That's how I wrote it. And again, there were surprises along the way. I met some wonderful people who assisted. Mike Marquardt helped a lot.
Yeah.
He had done some work on it, and of course the Tanners helped a lot. Wes Walters, Presbyterian ministry and minister from Missouri, was probably the biggest help. That man, he's deceased now, painstakingly assisted with the photographs on there. Oh, the photographs are another story. The only thing we had were pictures from that 1968 improvement era.
Right.
Okay, or what you could find laying around in little displays that the
There were
church
some
had.
black and whites made too.
So I went to the BYU, I lived in Provo at the time, the BYU Special Collections Department, and I talked to the curator, Chad Flake, and I asked if he had any of the photographs that were used for that improvement era article. And he says, oh yes, we have the originals and the original negatives. So I said, really? May I look at them? Why, certainly. So he walked me into a little room, took out a box about the size of a just a folio box. And he opened it up, and here were beautiful 8x10s, full detail, crisp. You could look at them under a microscope and count the cells in the papyri practically, plus the large negatives. And I said, could I get copies of these? He says, oh, sure. We'll print them off for you. It'd be about $1 a piece or something like that. So I found myself in possession of a beautiful set of color photographs of the papyri, all except one fragment, the church historian's fragment. Could never get a picture of that. Well, other than the one that was in the improvement era. So that's why in my book that one doesn't look as nice as the others. Well, anyway, so I had these photographs, but they were all in a different scale. They had a ruler with them next to the pieces. And they also had photographs on the back where they had things like architectural drawings of the Kirtland Temple, things like that. Back in those days, they didn't have Scotch tape, so when something was torn, they took a little strip of paper, put glue on it, and put that on it. And all of this contemporary stuff on there showed that these were the original papyri that had been glued to paper by Joseph Smith and his associates. Anyway, Wes Walter has got these, and he says, let's go and put them all to scale and then assemble them. So we did. I went through dozens, over 100 different prints before we finally got the scale, the tone, and everything right. This is in the days before computers. This is in the mid-'80s. And so I finally created a collage of the Book of Abraham Papyri and the Book of Joseph Scroll, and that collage, photographed it, and that became the photographs in my book. And to this day, with computers and everything, nobody else has bothered to try to do this, because the ones in the book that Wes Walters helped with were so good that even the Mormons use it. There was a little thing that a guy named John Gee, who was a quack that portrays himself as a Egyptologist, got the degree just so he could defend the church. They did a little thing called the Book of Abraham, an amazing thing, a little DVD thing, and it uses my fold-outs in there while it's talking about how wonderful the Book of Abraham is. I contacted the publisher and said, do you realize you're using copyrighted material from my book? And I never heard another word back from them. Well, anyway, so I'm getting off the track here because I enjoy talking about this.
We're interested in the book. That's something that's very good. So
well, I wrote the book. I wrote the book, and copies of it got leaked to the Mormon Church, even though I'd printed it on red paper every time I copied it on the copier machine, whatever. They got a hold of it, and they did their best to try to work on it, but even they didn't anticipate the results when it was published, because a wonderful publisher, the Institute for Religious Research in Grand Rapids, Michigan, picked up the book, and the agreement was that they would publish this book. They would distribute something like 50,000 copies of it all at once in a mass mailing to Mormons who people submit a list of names, things like that. It would just be like a avalanche hitting the Mormon Church all at once. And in return, I could receive books to go and give to people, but I would never take 1 cent for royalties. Anything that I would be entitled to royalties would go into the cost of continuing to provide this book free of charge to any Mormon who asks for it. Mm-hmm. So that's what we did. And I ended up losing a job with the school district over it.
Of course you did.
And a lot of other indignities, but that's how God works, you know. I mean, I gave this book to God, and God used it, and he says, okay, I'll take care of you. Don't worry about what happens to you. Yeah. And here I am all these years later being taken care of. Yeah. It's done wonderful work, and I'm pleased with it. I won't say I'm proud of it because I don't feel like I did it.
So basically you were still Mormon while you printed the book? Oh,
no, that's another story.
That's why I didn't
No,
know.
that's another story. I had left the church in 1980, about 2 years after my around the block with the missionary experience. That's a whole other story. Shall I go into that real quick?
Sure. We haven't heard
All
much from
right.
you, Charles. So
All right.
We want to spend some time with you.
Well, gosh, okay. So it's 1980, and my wife has already come to the realization the Mormon church isn't true. We had been attending a small church in Orem, and I said, you know, I just am not comfortable with being considered a Mormon by them, even if I'm not a good one to them. I said, I want to go ahead and go through the process to get excommunicated from the Mormon church. Back then, you couldn't just write a letter and have your name removed. That came later. Back then, the only way out was excommunication. So I went to the bishop and I said, I would like to have my trial that you put on and be excommunicated because I don't believe in the Mormon church. He says, well, let me let you talk to the stake president. So I talked to the stake president, and he tried witnessing and bearing his testimony and all, and talking me out of it. And so I said, no, I really want this. I don't believe the Mormon church is true. And the letter that I wrote to them basically said that I no longer had a sustaining belief in the scriptures, doctrines, and authority exclusive to the LDS church. That's how I put it. Well, there wasn't much they could do. They decided to convene a stake high court, okay? And I attended it. Put my suit on, went over to the stake center, and was standing around when a couple other people started showing up, and we began chatting informally outside the room and so forth. Well, there was a few others that drifted in, and then finally somebody said, well, I wonder if this Charles Larson's going to show up at all. And I said, oh, that's me. I'm the guest of honor. They thought I was there as another, as another whatever. So we went in, and I remember, let's see, there were 6 people on one side of the table who represented justice, and 6 people on the other side of the table who represented mercy. There was the stake president and his counselors, and there was the bishop of the ward and his counselors, and there was one of them was doing the scribe or whatever. I don't know. The numbers escape me right now, but basically justice was supposed to be for prosecuting me, and mercy was supposed to be for defending me, and none of them knew what to do because I simply wanted out. I remember one of the old men there. I'm an old man now. Tears in his eyes telling me about his family in England coming over in the 1840s and asking me if I would read the Book of Mormon just one more time. And I told him, I just finished reading the Book of Mormon again, and every page of it screamed fraud to me. But I will tell you what I will do. Gentlemen, I will make a bargain with you that I will read the Book of Mormon one more time all the way through, if each of you will read a book that I give to you. And that book would have been the telephone book by Gerald and Sandra Tanner. Not one of them agreed to do that because they were right. I was wrong. So they said that they would deliberate, and I was to wait outside. So I waited outside. And a very short time later, I came back in, and then I was told that my name would be stricken from the rolls of the church, that I was excommunicated, that I could no longer partake of the sacrament, my tithes would not be received, and all of the blessings that I had received were taken from me. I no longer had the gift of the Holy Ghost, and that they encouraged me to attend my church meetings so that I could repent.
So you lost your eternal security?
I lost my eternal security just like that. Jesus had nothing to do with it. Okay. So I thanked them, and I told them that this was a great weight off my shoulders, and I felt the same spirit of refreshment that I felt the day that I was baptized into the Mormon church. And that was it. Wow. So, yeah, I left in 1980 and worked on the Book of Abraham project later on in the mid-'80s.
Cool.
Well, that's my story.
Pretty good one, too.
Well, thank you.
One I've never heard before.
Oh,
It's awesome, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Let's get Marvin next here a little bit. Give us a little more, Marvin.
Well,
You got to turn it the other way so it faces you. There you go.
oh, this way?
Yeah, like you're going to swallow the hairball.
You start coughing like a cat a little bit.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, I was raised in the church. I didn't have any questions about it. When my first convert, when I was in the 7th grade, I just accepted everything that was told me. And then I was at my grandparents' house, and somebody had given them a copy of a little booklet, just, I don't know, 20, 30 pages, called Mormonism Under Searchlight by Biederwolf. And the first edition did not have any references. They made statements like Adam, God, and so forth, but no references. And I just kind of poo-pooed it. I thought, nah, this is just anti-Mormon propaganda. And but then I started looking a little more seriously. I thought, well, I want to go on a mission before too long. I was still a young person. And I better read the standard works. And that was a mistake. I expected the Book of Mormon. I always heard that it had all the answers. Just read the Book of Mormon, and I found more things that contradicted what I'd been taught by reading the Book of Mormon. And of course, the Doctrine and Covenants, I found a lot of problems with that. And I really wasn't looking for problems, but they just popped out of the page. And finally I met some Christians, and I was discussing beliefs and their beliefs and so forth, and I realized that what I believed was very different, because I planned to be a god someday, and they want to know where I got that. And I said, well, the Bible says this man is God once was, and as God is, man may be. And they didn't know the Bible said that, so they wanted to know where it was. And of course, I had no idea. It was just something I had heard. And anyway, a long story short, after a while, I thought I need to read the Bible too. So I did, from cover to cover. A lot of things in the Old Testament I didn't understand, but when I got into the New Testament, and especially in the book of Romans and Galatians, it was challenging me, and I'm sure it was the Holy Spirit. And I realized my trust was in the church. The church occupied for me what Christ should have had in my life. And then I remembered, as I read through the Gospels, the church was only mentioned twice, in Matthew 16:18 and 18:17. So Jesus didn't put that much emphasis on the church. Joining the church is never even mentioned. And yet that's what I was telling people. You need to join the church. It's the true church, and it's all about church. But anyway, through what contact I had with Christians and reading the New Testament, I came to the conclusion that salvation was God's gift. That's what it says. It's the gift of God. And I was working for it. And I used to try to mimic Joseph Smith. Up in the mountains, I went out in the woods and kneeled down and prayed and asked God to send Moroni or somebody. And he didn't do that. And at any rate, I received Christ as Savior as a young person. I was 17. And I thought, I left the church. And then after I got into ministry out here in Utah, I discovered, no. I found, like you did, the only way out was to be excommunicated. So I thought, well, I've waited this long, I'll wait and see if they excommunicate me. And sure enough, they did. At that time, I'd already started bringing in young people back in the 60s and 70s. We brought young people from all over the country and trained them and then put them out door to door to share the gospel. And at any rate, I got sidetracked there. But anyway, it was during that time when I was still doing what we called Operation Utah. I was going to bed one night about 10 o'clock, and there was a knock at my door, and there was two men, probably middle-aged, who handed me a summons to appear in court. So I said, well, I would be there. And I was serving as chairman of, there used to be an evangelical ministers group in Salt Lake, and I was chairman of it at that time. And we had a meeting that week, and so I told them about it, and several of them wanted to go. So I said, well, you have to go as character witnesses. That's the only way you might get in, and you might not. Anyway, several of them came. We had about 30 people that went with me to the excommunication. And it surprised the bishop and the others that were there. They had to move to a larger room. But in the process, they read the charges against me, which were that I'd alienated myself from the church and was serving as an ordained Baptist minister. And I knew they couldn't prove that. There was only one person in the room that could prove that. That was me, you know. And so I said, they said, do you want to plead guilty to the charges? And I said, no, I want you to prove the charges. They looked at one another, and I said, can you prove that I'm an ordained Baptist minister? Well, of course they couldn't. And at any rate, I said, you know, the thing that puzzles me about this trial is when I was 8, I had the free agency to join the Mormon Church. And now I'm 34, and I don't have the free agency to leave the church. So somehow, in the Mormon Church, I lost my free agency. And and that didn't sit too good with them. But anyway, I had an opportunity. I just, they didn't want to hear, they said, we don't want to discuss theology. And I said, well, why do you think I left? And anyway, I had a chance to share briefly about my faith in Christ, and as planned, of course, I finally got excommunicated. But I felt it was kind of a sham to begin with. If I had the agency to join the church at 8, why in the world couldn't I leave at 34? It just didn't make sense. But the Lord has led down through the years. I came to try to start churches and to witness to Mormons, and we've had a lot of interesting contacts. I think of one lady that was, I didn't know it at the time, but she was a polygamist, and we contacted her through the door-to-door work, and she wanted to talk a little bit more, so I went back, and in the conversation she said, don't you think that that marriage in Cana of Galilee could have been Jesus' wedding? And I said, no. And she said, well, why not? And I said, because Jesus was invited to that wedding, and I don't know any bridegroom invited to his own wedding. You know? And it was that little tidbit that turned things around for her. And I presented the gospel, and she received Christ, and she shared she belonged to the Allred group out in Bluffdale, and she shared with another older couple, and they came to know Christ, and she moved out of the state. Well, her husband gave her $50 and told her to leave. She lives in Southern California somewhere now, but that was just one of our experiences from door to door. Another one was an older couple that we contacted, and they said they would like to hear more about it. And I took another fellow with me, and we went back to the home, and they had invited their Sunday school teacher, who happened to be a 70, and he tried to take the charge of the meeting immediately, and he said, you believe in God, we believe in God. You believe in Christ, we believe in Christ. You believe the Bible, we believe the Bible. And I said, hold it. You know and I know there's a difference. That's why we're here. And I said, you said you believe the Bible. Do you believe that I can find a relationship with God that will get me into the very presence of God when this life is over through the message that's in the Bible? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because it's incomplete. And I said, incomplete? Are you talking about those 20 lost books that Mormons talk about and that are supposedly lost? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you have them? And he looked kind of startled, and finally said, yes. And I said, you have the book of Adu the prophet? And he said again, yes. And I looked at him and I said, you're going to have to tell that to somebody else. I grew up in the church. I'm very familiar with Mormon scripture, and that's not one of their scriptures. He jumped up and punched me in the nose.
For reals?
Yeah. and actually, the meeting came to a conclusion shortly after that, but the older couple actually wrote a letter apologizing for his actions. They said they didn't know that he would do that. But I've had several kind of funny experiences like that. I was yanked off of my feet by my necktie when I was tracking down around Temple Square one time. A lot of our kids were chased out of yards with a hose or something. My daughter was one of them. Yeah. But while we were doing that initially, the young people that we had come say, don't you have a little synopsis so that we have a better idea what to share and how to respond and so forth? So I started putting together some mimeograph notes. That was back before the computers and so forth. And finally I had a booklet of 61 pages, I think it was, of mimeograph material. And if you do that, and we did around 3,500 to 4,000 copies with a hand-crank mimeograph. And I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so I contacted a printer, and that's where my little book called Mormon Claims Answered came from those notes. And I finally just put it in a small book. It's not intended to be exhaustive like Tanner's, but just to have some basic information. And God has used that in amazing ways. One guy was a missionary in Mexico, and while he was down there, his brother was killed in an auto accident. He came home, and somebody from one of our Operation Utah groups had given him a copy of my mimeograph notes. It was in that home, and he picked it up and started reading it. And he asked his parents if he could take it with him, and they said sure. Well, he got down to San Diego and called them and said, I can't go back. I've got too many questions. And then he called me long distance. In those days, long distance was expensive. And we talked for over an hour, and ultimately he came to know Christ. In fact, the last time I saw him, he was serving as an associate minister of a little independent church out in, I think it was in the Bay Area, if I remember right. But so it's been interesting to see how God would use somebody that I had no intention of writing anything. All I was going to do was just preach the gospel in Utah. But we've had a lot of good experiences. I don't know how many times. It was a kind of a last-minute thing. I was traveling across the country here. When was that? Probably 8 or 9 years ago now. My granddaughter was graduating from a college, and I stopped in St. Louis, and I was checking into the motel, and the clerk was a black guy, a very nice fellow, and he said, I see you're from Utah. Are you Mormon? I said, no, well, I used to be. And he said, well, what do you think of the Mormons? He saw I had a Utah tags on my car. And I said, well, there's a lot of nice people, but I said I just could not believe the doctrine anymore. And then he admitted he was supposed to be baptized this next Wednesday in the Mormon church. Well, we were up till 3 o'clock. And he made a profession of faith in Christ. I trust it's real. It seemed to be. But interesting cases like that. I was speaking down in the Bay Area at a church, and a guy approached me just before the service, and he was supposed to be baptized that night. And so I started talking to him, and the time came I was supposed to be on the platform, and I said, I need to get in there. And at any rate, he actually came to know Christ, and the next year he came to our Operation Utah and helped to go door to door and so forth. So God's been gracious in a lot of ways. He's using somebody that's a nobody to reach a few people at least. So, but that's part of our ministry.
Let's take a break. So Marvin, another question about the Book of Abraham. When it came out, you were involved early on, and you got some photographs. I'd like to hear your story about how that happened.
Well, when the story broke, November 27th, 1967, I believe, the Deseret News had pictures of the papyri on the front page, and I thought there must be a place where I can get some photographs of it. So I went to the distribution center and got some, and then I decided I needed to follow up, because I think it was a year and a half or two before that, I had written to Dr. Wilson at Chicago University and Dr. Parker at Brown, and I sent them what was in the Pearl of Great Price and asked if the translation was what it purports to be, and neither one, of course, agreed with that. So then I sent copies of what came out November 27th, 1967, and asked, now what would you say? And they said, this time it's not a poor copy, but it is legitimate, but it's still, funeral papyri. It has nothing to do with Abraham.
And these are some of the primary sources, work that you did that I used in my book.
Is that right? Yeah, but I was very interested in it. There was something back, what was it, 1911 or 12, that piqued my interest. And so I thought, well, I want to get an updated picture from somebody that knows something more than I do about the Egyptian writing and so forth. But I was surprised at their candor, that it wasn't what they said, what Joseph Smith said. The thing that bugs me about Mormonism, everything hinges on Joseph Smith. Everything, whether it's the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, or priesthood, or everything hinges on Joseph Smith.
Everything has problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Marvin. Then next, I'd like to ask Charles about some other issues he's been studying, and let's see what he has to say about that.
Okay, I'll put Brandon down here. Well, I've been following as many of the advancements as I can on the research and scholarship that's being done by a number of people. And some of it is incredible. The work on DNA among Native Americans, and the total lack of the Cohen model haplotype among the Native Americans, which is a gene that is found only in Semitic people of the Jewish tribe. So many things. In fact, one of the things that first got me back before they even had DNA was the anthropology of Asiatics and Native Americans, how they share blood group types, how they have the shovel-shaped incisors, and all of these other anthropological features. So I was ready for that, but I love the new stuff that's come out. One of the areas that I'm specifically interested, though, lately is authorship of the Book of Mormon. And most of you know that when you try to raise a question about that, a Mormon will go and say, well, where could it have come from then? There are so many theories, and the only one that makes any sense is that an angel gave plates to Joseph Smith, and he was inspired because he couldn't have written it himself. Where'd it come from? Well, I think that there are a number of plausible explanations. I own a copy, an original copy of View of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith, who is the pastor of a church in Poultney, Vermont, that Oliver Cowdery's mother was a member of and that Oliver Cowdery attended. This was Oliver Cowdery's pastor. His big theme in life and his reason for being was that he believed that the Indians were the 10 lost tribes of Israel, that they were Hebraic. And in his book, he puts out his hypothesis for this about how when they got to this continent, they divided into two separate groups, and one which was civilized and one which was barbaric, and that a number of wars must have ensued over the centuries, and eventually the civilized people were wiped out, leaving the barbaric remnant upon the land. And then he quoted several chapters of Isaiah, showing that it was the job of the Gentiles or of the believers to go and bring these lost people back into the fold. Okay, sort of like the Book of Mormon. I often take that book down, or have taken it down, when I've talked with missionaries in my home and opened it up when that question comes up and had them read a couple of paragraphs on a certain page that gives a synopsis of the entire Book of Mormon right there. And they look at the date, 1825, 1826, when was that? Wow, that was before the Book of Mormon. That was before Joseph Smith, even got gold plates. How about that? So that's one thing. View of the Hebrews, I think, is a source, but interestingly, the author of it, Ethan Smith, graduated from Dartmouth College in 1796, the same class as Solomon Spaulding. And Solomon Spaulding, of course, was a preacher and an aspiring author who had authored at least one unpublished book that we know of, and is strongly suspected of having authored two, one of which became lost. I'm intrigued by the fact that Sidney Rigdon worked just a few miles from this publisher in a tannery that provided the skins to the book publisher to bind their books with at the time that Solomon Spaulding had submitted his manuscript there, and then Solomon Spaulding died. That manuscript has never been located. It is not the same manuscript that was in the trunk in Hawaii that was found, that is believed to be, by some people, to be the only book that Solomon Spaulding wrote. In 1830, when Mormonism Unveiled, Elias Howe's book, came out, he had interviewed many contemporary people who had looked at the Book of Mormon that knew Solomon Spaulding and said, Solomon Spaulding read his work to us as it was progressing. Those names are the same: Alma, Nephi, Lehi. All of these are the same names, the same type of a story. The only thing is that Solomon Spaulding didn't have all of the religious content in there. It was more like an account of wars and settling and people and things like that. Well, that intrigues me. And then, of course, there have been the linguistic studies of authorship. You take the Book of Mormon and you compare it with the writing styles of different people. Much of it lines up with Solomon Spaulding's style. Quite a lot of it ends up being Orson Pratt's style. A good portion of it Oliver Cowdery's style, and on it goes. Sidney Rigdon's style, but only a very tiny portion of it is Joseph Smith's style of writing. So it's interesting to look at the significant parts of the Book of Mormon that follow the linguistic style of these people. One theory that I'm strongly gravitating toward now is that Sidney Rigdon purloined this copy of Solomon Spaulding's manuscript from the publisher after he died, and decided that he would rewrite it, throwing in a lot of religious material to justify his position on Reformed Campbellism. And if you read the Book of Mormon, the Christianity that's presented in there is basically Campbellism, only reformed and revised. Okay, it's slightly different. It's Sidney Rigdon's version of Campbellism. But he had help in doing this. And according to this one particular study, Orson Pratt was involved in it, in the creation of the final Book of Mormon. Oliver Cowdery was involved in it. And most of this work was done in 1826. Oliver Cowdery, shortly afterward, came into association with the Smith family when he was teaching school, and was told about this work that Joseph was involved in. At least that's the way that the story works out now. And so he went down to Pennsylvania to find out about the Book of Mormon plates and so forth that Joseph Smith said he was writing. I don't believe that that's how it happened. I believe that that's how the story concocted afterward. Oliver Cowdery was related to Joseph Smith. I believe his great grandmother or his grandmother was Lucy Mack Smith's aunt or something. It relates in there. I'd have to look it up. I don't have it on the top of my head. But at any rate, they were related. I believe that Oliver Cowdery, in collaborating with these other gentlemen in producing this work, suggested bringing Joseph Smith, his cousin, into it to purport to be the finder of this. And so the whole gold plate story was concocted in order to go and provide a basis for it. And Joseph Smith was a good grifter, and he could go and spin this. But these people, I believe, thought that they were controlling Joseph Smith. And it turns out that Joseph Smith, kind of like the industrialists that thought that they could control Hitler, Joseph Smith ended up taking control over them and kicking most of them out. Well, so I would like to go ahead and do a book like that, and the title of it will be By His Own Hand Upon Fool's Cap.
That will be interesting. Well, thank you very much. I can't wait to read that book. So
It'll be a while.
yeah, I can imagine. I'd like to give the mic over to Jamie. So I want to hear something from you, Jamie.
Okay.
How'd you get involved in all this?
Well, to be honest, I'd never heard of a Mormon. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I never heard of a Mormon. And when we moved to Arizona, we had some neighbors that were Mormon, and we enjoyed getting together with them all the time. Probably once a month we get together, and they invited us over for family home evening. We didn't know what that was. And so we went over and spent time with them. They had other people there, and then we didn't really know anything about Mormonism, so they sent missionaries to our house. And so we got to know the missionaries really well. They came over. We had a great time with them. Great kids. They're just kids, you know. And they got involved with our family stuff, birthday parties, stuff like that. And then Chip had just said, you know, we're going to take everything that you say and we're going to let you present, and then we're going to take everything and compare it to what the Bible says. And so we kind of got to know Mormonism that way. And we really had a heart for Mormons, just, you know, getting to know them. And so then God put that on our heart we'd never been Mormon before, but we decided that, you know, that was an area that God was calling us into, because we care about the people. And so we moved our little family to Utah over 30 years ago, and to a little town called Ephraim, which there were no Christian churches. I think there's like a Catholic church at that time, but that's pretty much it. That and Mormonism, and so he pastored the church for 13 years. We started in our house. We weren't planning on having a church. We just wanted to be a light in a dark place. And people started coming, became a little Bible study, then it grew into a church, and we found a building and moved into it. And so he pastored for 13 years, and then we called in Rodney Zedeker. He's our pastor now. And we just really felt like, how do we reach these people? If they don't come to our church, and I mean, we were friends. We got to know neighbors and stuff, but as a whole, Mormonism as a whole. And so we just decided that, hey, let's pray about this, and how can we reach like Snow College campus that's in our town, because the college kids were, there were Christian kids coming to Snow College, becoming Mormon, and we just had a heart for them. And so over the summer, we just prayed and asked God to lead us to a building that we could, be there for people. And got this beautiful old house, was built for Snow College president, beautiful building. And I mean, there was miracle after miracle, so I won't go into all that. But we had Christian people say, well, Mormons don't drink coffee. Why would you start a coffee shop? That doesn't make any sense. But to us, in our mind, we're like, if a Mormon comes in our front door, maybe they'll be open. Maybe they're more open. We wanted to give people that opportunity. And we started that, 15 years ago? Yep. Maybe? And when we first started, it was like, we'll hardly see anybody come in the doors, Today, it's so busy. I mean, it's like crazy. There are so many people that come in and visit and drink coffee now. So things have changed drastically in the years that we've been there. And then we decided that these people, your heart breaks for them, because how difficult it is. It has to be coming out, especially in our community, because it's like very, very Mormon there. It used to be very, very, very Mormon. Now it's just very Mormon. And the people, yeah. And people are really they're questioning, the younger generation, totally questioning. And we just are available there, and if anybody wants to talk, they know who the Christians are in town. They can come and visit, have a cup of coffee, and so that's where we are. I'll let him go more into detail.
How did you get to? Let me
Yes.
How did you get to decide to come? I mean, you get this crazy husband. Are you equally crazy? Oh, okay. I just want to know. Are you equally crazy? I mean, you're just like, yeah, that's a great idea, honey. Or wait a minute, what are you talking about?
No. We're equally crazy. We actually had we have a heart and did have a heart for the unreached people groups. And we were actually planning on being missionaries to Indonesia. And we were getting ready to sell everything. And then God brought Mormons into our life. And we actually were taking some furniture to Utah to help somebody out. And we realized that when we got to Utah that this was an unreached people group. And not that far from, we lived in Phoenix at that time. And so God gave us a heart for the Mormon people. And we are just as crazy, both of us, We have crazy ideas, so.
I have to tell you how much I admire people willing to go out into the field in the small towns around here, or anywhere really. My wife came from a small town in Wyoming that was exclusively Mormon. And the thing that I found about Mormon small towns is that there are 4 criteria by which a person is judged: activity in the Mormon church, devoutness, steadfastness, pioneer heritage, how much money you have, and how good you were in athletics in high school. Those are the 4 things that matter the most, and they're not necessarily in that order. So I admire what you do.
Well, thank you. So, Chip, I don't know what you're going to add to your wife, but what even caused you to just decide to come to Utah? And, we kind of heard what she's saying. You don't just up one morning and say, "Oh, let's go to Utah." What's the deal?
When we were in Phoenix, I was a youth pastor, and a good friend of mine began directing the camp that's right up Ephraim Canyon. It's called Utibica. And so because Joe was directing the camp up there, we decided to take our youth to Camp Utibica for summer camp. And every year we would come, the local Baptist pastors at the camp would tell us that they really needed Christians in Utah and that we should think about moving to Utah. And we kept saying, well, we're settled where we are. We have a great ministry. We had a ministry to street kids. And we had 20 street kids coming to our church with us. Their parents were all bar hops and prostitutes and drug addicts and all kinds of things. And so one year as we were leaving the camp, one of the local missionary pastors, and Marv may know, do you know Jonathan Edwards? Yes. So Jonathan Edwards, great missionary name, knocked on my window, and I rolled my window down, and he said, "Hey, Chip, on your way home, I have a challenge for you. Would you look and see how many Christian churches you can find between Ephraim and Page, Arizona?" So driving down Highway 89, you go through 22, 24 rural Utah communities, and he just challenged me to look for Christian churches. And so as we drove down through there, we had a Suburban full of high school kids, and we went really slow through every town and looked down every street looking for a church with a cross on it. And it was actually a deceptive thing for Jonathan to challenge. He knew there were no churches. He set me up,
And Chip likes a challenge.
And so we looked in every town, and there were literally no Christian churches in those communities. And we drove into Phoenix, and I'm sure it wasn't on every corner, but it seemed like every corner had a mega church on it. And the Spirit of God spoke to our hearts and basically said, if you leave here, somebody else will do what you're doing, but nobody wants to go to Utah. And so we already had a heart for an unreached people group, and that was what the revelation to us, that this was an unreached people group, that there was no Christians, there were no Christianity there. So very quickly, God moved us, and we ended up in Utah in 1991. And so Jamie told a lot of the story already about that. Pieces of that story. But I'll tell some of the unique things, because we're not afraid, or we're not shy, so to speak. We'll try anything. We'll go anywhere. We'll do anything. And it's gotten me into some interesting situations over the years. And, one of them was, so I became friends with Joel Kramer, who's the archaeologist I work with today in Israel. But he created the DNA versus the Book of Mormon video. And as soon as I saw that, I immediately called him and said, I've been looking for something like this. This is the information I needed. I knew about the problem, but I didn't know how to verbalize it to a Mormon in a way that would make sense. And the video was perfect for that. And so we distributed that whole video in our whole valley. We helped Joel distribute it in Brigham City and became fast friends with Joel. So at one point, Joel was going to videotape the Martin Harris pageant, which is in Clarkston, Utah. And so he went to videotape it, and he said, I wanted to make sure that I knew that it was a federal cemetery that we were right next to, and the pageant was on the hillside next to the cemetery, so I knew I was legal for me to be in the public cemetery. So he said, I put my camera right on a grave. So I knew I was in the cemetery, and I started videotaping it, and to make a long story short, he got arrested and thrown in jail. And so I called him, and I'm like, Joel, dude, you got arrested? He's like, yeah, it was totally illegal. And they know it was totally illegal, and all the charges are going to get dropped. There's no way they can support arresting me for doing that. I was in public property. And so he said, but you guys, nobody is there witnessing at all, like the Manti pageant. These people, somebody needs to come and witness to the people at the Martin Harris pageant. I said, but dude, you just got arrested. He's like, they wouldn't dare arrest you guys. what they did with me was completely illegal. They're going to be in trouble for it, so they wouldn't dare arrest you. So I'm like, okay, we'll come. So I brought a group of guys from our church, and we went there, and all we were doing was passing out some literature that we had created that compared what Mormonism teaches about God and what the Bible teaches about God. And so I was just standing in the cemetery as people were parking and walking through the cemetery to the pageant, and I was just saying, would you like something to read before the pageant starts? When they asked what it was, I said, it's just a comparison of what Christianity believes about God and what the Mormon Church teaches about God. And literally every person was taking the tract. I mean, it was, at Manti pageant, Marshall can tell you, very few people, maybe 1 out of every 10 or 20 will take your tract from you. But here, they're all taking it. And so it wasn't very long, and the pageant president came running up, and he said, you can't be here. You can't do this. I'm like, no, I can do this. This is America. This is a free country. I have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. I'm on public property. All I'm doing is passing out literature. I'm not going to disrupt your pageant. I'm just here to pass out literature. And he says, well, I'm going to call the sheriff. And I'm like, okay, do whatever you have to do. So he ran off, and then pretty soon the sheriff came by, and I offered him a piece of literature. Would you like something to read? And he's like, no, I'm here on business. And he walked by. And then 5 minutes later, he came back. He says, what are you doing? I said, I'm passing out religious literature. He says, you can't do that here. I said, well, you know this is public property. This is a federal cemetery. I looked it up before this. This is on the Federal Registry of Cemeteries. This is public property. And I have the freedom to pass out religious literature. I have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom, and he said, put your bag down. So I put my bag down, and he handcuffed me and stuffed me in the car. And my dad said, I'll get your bag, I'll bail you out. And I have a video of the whole thing because somebody saw what was going on and they started videotaping it. So I got thrown in jail for passing out tracts in Utah, which I don't think very many people in all of America can make that claim that they got arrested for just doing religious stuff on public property. And so that was one of those instances that was a unique instance that got us into trouble. Another really unique situation, we talked about this with you guys earlier, but Randy Gavin, who is a former Mormon, was the mission stake president of the Salt Lake Stake, was saved, and then through a process of connections was able to create a video called the Jesus Christ Joseph Smith, A Search for the Truth. And I had been praying, Jamie and I had been praying, because we really felt called to reach the Mormons, the whole Mormon community for Christ. And we were in a little rural community in the middle of nowhere, Utah. We had a few friends that we had made that were Mormons, but we weren't reaching very many people for Christ. And I was just praying, God, give us a voice somehow to reach more people. And somehow Randy heard about us and came down and met me. And he asked me, he said, I'm looking for somebody that would be willing to distribute this video to all of the rural counties. And he says, you seem to have a heart for rural Utah. Could you do that? And I said, well, I probably could. I couldn't distribute it, but I could probably raise the funds and mail it to every house in rural Utah. And he says, would you do that? And I'm like, I'll try. So I sent out letters to all the people that support us and said, this is what I want to do. This is how much it would cost to send it to Cache County. This is how much it would cost to send it to Beaver County. This is how much it would cost to send it to, to all the different counties that were rural. And people donated the money to mail it. And I said, okay, if you give me the DVDs, I have the money to mail it. So he set it all up, and we hired a company to send all the DVDs out all on the same weekend. So the same weekend that the big churches in the larger communities went door to door and distributed the DVD, that same weekend it got mailed to every house in rural Utah. And so that was an interesting opportunity because that video went literally to every home in Utah. So that was a huge thing. And through that, we got death threats on the telephone. And I don't even know for sure how people figured out that we were the ones that distributed it, but somehow they did.
We had
and
DVDs thrown on our lawn.
Yeah, so we got death threats from doing that. So that was an interesting thing. Yeah. So another interesting thing that happened with us is we've had I don't know, hundreds of college-age mission teams come through our ministry. And we always get them involved. We take them to Temple Square, take them, do different things with them, do things on Snow College with them. And one year, a group of girls from LeTourneau University in Texas, they said, we would like to reach out to a polygamous community. Would you do that with us? And I said, well, I never have, and I know where there's a polygamous community, Rocky Ridge, which is the fundamentalist community. I said, I don't know whether they'll let us. They may run us out, but we can try. And so I said, I'm totally open to that. So they came, we said, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I think this first time we should go in as unassuming, non-threatening as we can possibly be. So what I would suggest is we go to Walmart and we buy some little potted flowers. We just tie a Bible verse to each flower and then go door to door and just say, hey, we're from out of town. These people are from out of state. We just want to be friends. And we'd like to get to know who you are. We know you're a unique culture in Utah. We'd like to get to know your culture a little bit. And here's a gift. And so that's all we did was pass out these little pots of flowers to everybody. And the community was very open. It was almost like they were hungry for outside communication, outside connections with people, because I think their only connection was with people within their own community. And so they were super friendly. And so it went better than we ever thought it would have. But a week later, Pastor Derek Smothers from Grace Bible Church in Springville called me, and he said, hey, Chip, we just had a mother and two children and her mother, the grandmother, come to our church from Rocky Ridge. And because you guys went into the community and passed out those flowers, they told us, said, we've been trying to find somebody we thought that might help us because we'd like to leave the community, but we need help. We can't just leave. We don't know how to survive in the outside world. So would your church be willing to help us? And he said, I told him we would. And so he wanted me to know that our outreach had created this connection. And so he contacted Paul Roby, who is the pastor of South Mountain in Salt Lake City, and said, hey, Paul, we've got this family of Mormons that want out, or polygamists that want out of the polygamous community. They need a place where somebody can house them, help them get their kids in public school, help them find jobs, help them get their GEDs. They don't have the education. He said, is there anybody in your church that'd be willing to do that? And Paul said, yeah, we'll help. I'll announce it on Sunday. So he announced it on Sunday, and a lady named Tanya Toole said, I will house them in my basement. I have an apartment in my basement that's empty. So she brought Esther and her kids and her mother into her basement and helped them, get reoriented in the civilized world, so to speak, outside of their community. And she said, I did not put any pressure to try to force anything like you have to go to church with us if you're going to live with us. But she said, I told her, we go to church every Sunday. If you want to go to church with us, you're welcome to. You don't have to, but just open. It's an open door for you. And they started going to church with them. And after a little while, Esther started talking to Tanya and said, there's a lot of other women like me in that community that need help to get out. So Esther came to Tanya and she told Tanya, we really need help because there's a lot of other women in the community, just like me, who are looking for a way out. We need to create an organization, and it shouldn't be like overtly Christian. It should just be overtly that we want to help polygamous women who want to get out of the community, and we're willing to help you. So Tanya said, we created the organization called Holding Out Help for Polygamists. Now you may have heard of that now. And it's overtly not on the website Christian, but every home that Tanya places people into are all Christian homes. So she places these women all into Christian homes for people to help them. So that organization then has grown into an organization that's helped hundreds, if not thousands, of polygamous women to come out. Many of them have gotten saved. So that's very cool. But on top of that, in our ministry, so this is just how God works. This is God's network. So on top of that, we had a couple in our ministry, Liz and Brody Olson, who were on staff with us. Brody went back to college, got his theology degree, came back to Utah and said, hey, Chip, I want you to show me the neediest place in Utah. So because we had started working with polygamous communities, we also started going to Colorado City. The very first time we went, it was with Holding Out Help for, Doris Hanson and Shield and Refuge Ministries. But then she never went back, but we kept going back. Every year we would go back to Colorado City. And so when Brody came and said, I want you to show me the neediest place in Utah, I said, that's simple. And I took him to Colorado City. And God led them to go to Colorado City. And because we had had contacts in the community for several years now, we were able to find an apartment where they could rent. And at that time, Warren Jeffs had just been arrested. The community was still 100% polygamist. There were no rentals in town. There was no houses for sale in town. There was no way for an outsider to get into town. But because we'd been going in and doing these, we called them picnics in the park with the local people that would come and visit with us, we met these women and they said, yeah, they can rent our apartment. So Liz and Brody were the first outsiders to move into the Colorado community, which was 10,000 polygamists, and they moved right into the middle of town.
Did you manage to get down the road just a little bit past Colorado City to Centennial Park as well? That's where the liberal fundamentalists live. I did quite a bit of work with that community, working with the Attorney General's office under their safety net program. And this is interesting, but fundamentalists are actually a great deal more committed than your typical Orthodox Mormon. And then again, they also have more severe problems. Right. But that's great you did that. Doris Hanson, lovely lady. Yeah.
So what you don't know is that I know Tanya, and the reason I know Tanya is because one of the fundamental Warren Jeffs families got a hold of Tanya and moved to Kennewick, Washington. And I got a call from my pastor, who's an ex-Mormon. He doesn't tell anybody, but I find these things out. And he says, Marshall, there's this lady named Linda going to give you a call, and she's got a polygamous family living with her. The wife died, and the husband kidnapped all of his kids. And they're staying with me. They've been here one night, and I'm a single woman. They can't stay with me. Do you have a place? And so my wife came home, and I said, hey, honey, we need to get a place for these people. We have a big motorhome and a little one. Can we put them in the motorhome? And she said, no. And I said, wait till you see the kids. So they came over after she got off work at 5 o'clock. She brought them over. Kids are playing. We have an acre and a half right in town. It's an awesome place, grass. They're playing out there. And my wife looks out the window and says, okay. So they are now living in that house. My mom died, and we moved to her house and bought that for my brother and sister. So they've been with us now. He became a Christian, taking my class, Mormonism 101, at Calvary Chapel Bible College. So, and they got married. And so the kids are anyway, so that's another extension of what's going on you don't even know about. So you have touched our town. Wow. Clear up in Kennewick, Washington, which is a long ways away.
Yeah. And so, anyway, unbeknownst to Tanya, Liz and Brody moved into Colorado City. And at the same time, Tanya had a heart to start something in Colorado City. And so when I went down to visit Brody one time, he showed me a log building that was just completely gutted, trashed by the community. It had been a library, and they just went in and burned all the books and destroyed everything. And so he said, I think this building could be a really great church. And I'm like, yeah, it would take a lot of work, but it's big enough. Yeah, if you could get a hold of it, it would work. Well, unbeknownst to Brody, Tanya leased that building for holding out help for polygamists. And then she was trying to figure out who she could get to start a community center there. And then she found out about Brody. So she said, hey, Brody, would you be willing to use this building to start a community center? And so then Brody started working with her. They fixed the building all up. And then she raised the money to buy the building, almost all the money that they needed to buy the building. And then eventually she gave it to Brody, and it became their church.
So, that's and on top of
exciting.
that, my daughter and son-in-law then, who were also on staff with us, had a heart. They worked with us for a while, then he went back and finished his schooling. When they came back, they wanted to join Brody and Liz in Colorado City. So now my daughter and son-in-law run the thrift store that's in that log building and the youth center that's in that log building, and they have sometimes as many as 90 local kids that come to their youth center on a weekly basis.
Just came back from there. That's why I was watching our
So
grandkids.
it just goes to show you, from one event where we just went and handed out flowers at a polygamous community, stepped out of our comfort zone, tried something new. From that one event, all of this spun out of it. And today there's a church in Colorado City called Grace Haven,
Community.
Grace Community Church. And there's about 75 to 90 people that attend the community church.
And they're building.
And they're building a new thrift store, which will also house the new church, and then the log building will become the community center.
Half of them
So-
are named Barlow.
A lot of them are named Barlow, yeah. So those are just some of the events that have been. What do I need to?
Talk about what you do in the ministry, like the articles and the.
Yeah, so right now, one of the things I do is I write an article once a month and put it in the local newspaper. And it's on biblical trustworthiness. It's on Bible archaeology. And so I've been doing that for 3 years. It's expensive. It costs $400 a month to put a half-page article in and nice pictures and everything. But I know the local people are reading it. And just 3 days ago, a 90-year-old man who's a pioneer stock LDS person in our community came to my house and said, I just wanted to talk to you. I've been reading your articles in the newspaper, and they're really interesting. And I noticed that you are spending a lot of time talking about Old Testament things that connect with the New Testament. And so I'm really interested in all your articles, and I want to encourage you maybe to watch this LDS program where they're going through the judges of Israel. And I said I would check into it for him. But just to see that, I mean, he had to go out of his way to come to my house. And I am in Sanpete County, known as the anti-Mormon of Sanpete County. I hired you to come to Manta Pageant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what everybody says. Yeah, they thought I hired everybody to come to Manta Pageant. So there was a rumor. There was a rumor going around town that I was a secret millionaire, and So anyway.
We always say we are not anti-Mormon, we're anti-Mormonism.
Yeah,
We
not.
love the people.
We're not protesters. We're pro-testers.
We test.
We test everything, and if it's true or not, and so.
Almost wore that shirt
So
today.
anyway,
Wow, that's a great shoot.
yeah.
So,
So those are just a few of the experiences we've had. I also got invited to go to an excommunication council, and because I went, they didn't excommunicate the guy, which was probably not good. But I mean, he was worried that they were going to excommunicate him for something false.
for watching in the video, right?
Yeah, well, he received one of the DVDs from us on his porch. He watched it and he took it to his bishop and said, "What is this? And are there answers to this? Are these things?" And that was what he got excommunicated for taking it to his bishop. And I just said, so if a person has a question, who are they supposed to go to? If they can't bring it to their bishop, and they said, "Did you talk to anybody else about this?" He said, "No, I just brought it to you." I said, "So you're going to excommunicate him for coming to his church leader to ask for answers? Well, how can you excommunicate a person for that?"
So who's supposed to go to? The anti-Mormons?
I know.
Yeah.
And they knew me, so they were all like, when I came in, they all like raised eyebrows. "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, he invited me to come, so I'm here. And am I allowed to sit in on this?" I said, they looked at each other. "I guess so." So yeah. So
But
anyway.
with our museum, the
So right now,
Institute teachers.
so this is what we're figuring out within Mormonism, at least in Sanpete County. Due to the Manti pageant, the percentage of Mormons has been reduced in our county from 91% when we moved there. It was the second highest percentage of Mormons in any county in the United States in 1991 to 61% today. A lot of that's because of the Manti pageant and the thousands and thousands of Christians that came in. But through that, at the same time that I was starting to do Manti pageant, I started going to Israel. And so then I built the Bible Museum.
And I didn't know at the time how valuable the Bible Museum was going to be, because the 30% of the people in our county that have left Mormonism, the majority of those become agnostic or atheist. Many of them still believe there must be a God, but they're just searching for truth. And the Bible Museum is our tool to draw them in. And this is really interesting. So just a month or a month and a half ago, I got a phone call from the Institute teachers saying, one of the Institute teachers saying, hey, I was in your cafe, I talked to one of your interns, she showed me your Bible Museum, and she suggested that I would ask you to give me a Bible Museum tour. Would you be willing to do that? So this is an Institute teacher in Ephraim. And in the past, they were so death on us that they wouldn't even talk to us. And now he's asking me if he can do a Bible Museum tour. And I said, absolutely, I would be more than happy to do a tour with you. And he said, could I bring the other Institute teachers? I'm like, sure, bring anybody you want to bring. So I think all 6 Institute teachers, I think that's all there are, 6 of them, I think they all came. And I did a Bible Museum tour, spent an hour and a half or 2 hours talking with them about the Bible Museum. And I focused on the display in our museum that proves the Bible could not have been altered, at least since the time of Christ. And if it hasn't been altered since the time of Christ, then that precedent would tell us that the Bible's never been altered, because why would they start altering it? Why would they alter it first and then never alter it again? So anyway, so I spent an hour and a half going through that with them. And just like you guys said, when you know how to talk to an LDS person, towards the end you can get them to agree with you. And I got the Institute teachers to agree with me that it would have been impossible for the Bible to have been corrupted after the time of Christ. They said that. So
I'm guessing that you didn't then ask them for a tour of their Book of Mormon museum.
No. That would have been counterproductive. So they figured that out easily. So now I wonder, because I know the Hound of Heaven, which is the Holy Spirit, will never leave them alone with what they learned that day. What are they going to do when they have to teach about the great apostasy and the corruption of the scriptures in their classes when they know, and they actually said, yeah, it would have been impossible. How can they teach that now? So, yeah.
Chink in the armor.
Chink in the armor, for sure. But, yeah, it's just amazing the doors that God opens when you're willing to just step out and just be, I feel like the youngster here kind of. Well, I don't know. We're probably not too different in age. But with Marv here, the old guard here, with Marv here, I feel like one of the younger guys. But I've been here for 30 years. I've had a lot of really interesting experiences, and I've watched God just do amazing things through what He's allowed us to start in Utah. So
I was just going to say that through our ministry, we bring a lot of interns in, and so through those interns, they're taking the gospel everywhere. We've got an intern that's going to Spain. We've got one, a kid. This is an awesome story, and I wish I had time to tell it. But do I have time? Yeah. Okay. He's from not Spain, Italy. Sam, every day he would come in the cafe. He was not Mormon,
2 espressos.
Actually, he tried Mormonism for a while. He'd get 2 espresso shots and just visiting and stuff. And he tried Mormonism, tried different things and stuff. And one of our staff members she works for the
911 dispatch.
Dispatch. She's a dispatcher. And she got a call one night, and there was a voice on the other end that said, hey, I'm going to commit suicide. And didn't say his name or anything. And
he basically just said, I'm going to commit suicide, but I don't want some poor innocent person to find my body, so I want you to know where you can pick up my body.
So he was in the Institute parking lot near some bushes, and Chelsea recognized his voice. And she's like, Sam, is that you? And he said he was taken back that somebody would know who he was. And so she talked him out of it, and then our staff went over and met with him and stuff like that. Well, he ended up accepting the Lord and going back to Italy and led his mom to the Lord, and he was witnessing to shop owners, and so there's a lot of young people that come into our ministry, and they're going out. We've got a couple in Thailand that are missionaries that came through our ministry. So because we're working with younger people, college age, you give them the tools, and and they know about Mormonism. They learn about the Bible Museum, the trustworthiness of the Bible, and just a really cool thing that God has done there. So,
yeah, and I guess the other large accomplishment that we've had is that I took many of the witnessing techniques that I learned at Manti Pageant on the streets, compiled them into a book called Witness to Mormons in Love, and I haven't kept a running count of how many have been sold, but I know that over 100,000 of those books have been sold, and this is like within the last 15 years or so is when I published it, and there's more being sold today than have ever been sold. So it's picking up even after 15 years, getting more and more. And so it's one of those things that's being used by God that at the time I started out like you, like a mimeograph. I started out making copies on a copy machine and stapling them all together and making these little booklets, and then eventually published it into called the Mormon Scrapbook, and then eventually becoming the Witness to Mormons in Love workbook. So those are the things that God's used us to do here. And I like to tell people I was just a painter. I was a house painter. So I'm not like this prestigious, rich, powerful, popular person. I just am a person, a normal, everyday, nobody person that God chose to use to plant things. I'm more of a pioneer than I am anything, and so I pioneered a church in Ephraim, pioneered a college ministry at Snow College, pioneered the cafe, the Solid Rock Cafe, the museum, all of these things. And so God has just used my gifting to start things, and then we have brought people in beside us to take those things over. And all of the people that God has brought to us are doing a way better job of it than I ever did to start with. So it's all gotten better and better and better. And so in a county that when we moved there was 91% Mormon, now 61% Mormon. When we moved there was no Christianity, and by God's grace, there's 3 churches that are all connected with the Ephraim Church today, and the Christian Cafe and the Christian Club at Snow College and the Bible Museum. And so God is just kind of expanded. We're watching what I think happened in the first century, because we moved into a place that was completely pagan, that completely had no Christianity. And it was like starting from ground zero and watching God build his church in a place that is very unlikely for a church to have ever be grown. So
God is faithful.
All on Mars Hill,
It's what I felt. A lot of times I felt like that. So and I don't believe it was us. It was what God did. It was God's grace and God's working.
And God's people. Helping.
Yep. God bringing people in that were perfectly suited for the positions that needed to be brought in. So
we got more staff coming next month.
Yeah. So
yep. It's good.
So that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Terry, you want to share something? How you end up getting sidearmed into going here or anything? Or?
He told me he's keeping you awake on the trip.
He is keeping me awake on the trip. Yeah, Terry's been here 12 years ago, and I don't know why he decided to come again. Everybody I had scheduled canceled at the last minute, and Terry's on my list. I just called him and, hey, you want to go with me? Yeah. I'm going, oh, that's cool. I get somebody, so it's pretty awesome. So, yeah, well, thank you guys. We'll, until we meet again, I think, I listen to the stories. I'm part-time. I had a full-time job. So I feel like I'm a nobody, more nobody than anybody here because, I just, I think the humbleness is good. And so, I think God gives each of us our gift, and maybe two, And so as you go down that road, following your gift, it's amazing to me what God does. I wake up and think, am I going to pinch myself? Am I really? This is just amazing. Just like we're talking the guy who came out of the church. My wife said yes. Can you believe that? And they lived in my motorhome for a while, and then I got a duplex next door. I knew the owner, and I did some work for him in a sprinkler system, and he said, "Hey, I got a family. They need to move into your side." He had a side he's just storing some stuff in. He said, "Go get a storage shed. Let's get it out of there." So he moved it out, and they moved in, and they could go across the fence and still play in our yard, and the kids just loved it. The oldest son was the second in line. My throat's doing something, but anyway, he would go everywhere with me. Can I go with you? Okay. And just, he heard about Christianity. He took Mormonism 101 twice. And then it's just like the whole family, they had problems, obviously, trying to get out of polygamy, and the kids wanted to go back, and they tried to, they would tell them, just step out of the sidewalk, we'll pick you up. We had, they were coming up all the time. This particular guy, his name is Boyd Jessup, and of course Jessup is a major name, and he was really good friends with Rulon. And when Rulon died, Warren didn't like him, so he didn't get any more wives. He only got one, and so still polygamous though. And then when his wife died, the kids were all they would take your kids and put them somewhere else. So you didn't have your own kids in your own house. And so at the funeral, he captured them. Say, hey, we're going to go take a little trip over and do something. And so he captured them, got them to Salt Lake the first night, and then Kennewick the second night. And he thought that was far enough away they wouldn't be able to get him back. Wrong. We had the cops out to our place so many times, preventing them from recapturing the kids and kidnapping the kids. You never hear them again if you get them. So that happened over and over again. And we had to educate the cops, It's like, well, that's nobody's going to do. You don't understand. And so I had a sergeant that was going to my church. And I explained to him what was going on when we first started. And he says, you call me anytime. Well, this lady policeman out there going, no big deal. I said, hold on a minute. You call this guy. So she calls him on the phone. Or I called him. She wouldn't call him. So I called him, handed her the phone. He talks to her, and she goes, okay, yes, sir. Yeah, okay, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. And so hands me the phone back. Okay, what do you need? And so the policeman just didn't realize what was going on.
Whole different world.
Oh, yeah. And what's really interesting is about 2 years earlier, one of the major guys from Warren Jeff's group is a truck driver, and he called me up on the phone. He's in Kennewick. I understand you have this rare Mormon library. Sure do. Could I come see it? Sure. So he comes over. He wants all the old stuff. And so I've got a bunch of old stuff. I mean, we're talking manuscripts. At that time, the church hadn't published a manuscript. I had the printer manuscript, and he's looking at the printer manuscript, the original Book of Mormon. I mean, my library is extensive. It's thousands of dollars. He spent probably an hour, and he says, anytime you come down to Warren Jeff's, he says, you call me, and I'll give you a tour. And so I had his phone number on the wall and his name. The kids saw that. How does he have that name clear up in Kennewick? And so they asked their dad, is that the same guy we know? I mean, he was in the goon squad. His dad had the camera. You show up. He follows you around. That's Boyd. And this is one of the goon squad guys.
The God Squad.
Yeah, God Squad. Yeah. Yeah. They follow you around. They harass you. They pull up in front of you. They just harass you the whole time. And they take pictures of you and all that. So he was one of those guys. And they bought him a $25,000 camera to take pictures of people. He still has it. So they're asking Dad, well, how come he has his phone number on the wall, right? So Dad comes to me and says, get that phone number off the wall. You know that guy? I go, yeah, he's been right here. I mean, you just see the goosebumps, the hair going up. He's been in there. Clear up here in Kennewick, he didn't get far enough, I was scared, And so I had to change the numbers into 8s and 4s to 5s and 6s and 8s and change the numbers on the wall. Left it up there because they were calling. to get rescued all the time. So yeah, it was funnier than heck. I can't remember the guy's name, but they still today know that guy. Yep. Marshall knows that guy? How does that happen? So how would that happen? He calls me out of the blue. How does that happen? You know? Amazing. So yeah, that's what we have here today. And so hope you guys enjoyed it.